This is the most beautiful acoustic guitar you have ever seen. A Gibson Custom Shop SJ200.
What's it worth?
It's an expensive guitar, man.
I mean, what's your best price on it?
I can do 90.
I'll give you 85.
I've got to have 90.
Okay. Change your mind, call me.
85, man.
All right.
The gold and silver pawn shop has seen countless historic items, but few arrivals carried the gravity of the case Landon brought through its doors. Inside was a 1941 Gibson SJ200, one of the rarest guitars ever made, and one once played by rock legend Stephen Stills.
This is a 1941 Gibson SJ200. It was owned by Stephen Stills of the band Crosby, Stills and Nash.
At that moment, this wasn't just a pawn deal. It was history in human hands. So what happened when Rick Harrison, famous for ruthless negotiations, faced a piece of music royalty?
I would absolutely love to get my hands on this guitar. It's beautiful, it's rare, and it was owned by a rock and roll legend.
How did one guitar trigger an $85,000 decision and reveal what truly matters when profit takes a back seat? Join us as we reveal the details of the million-dollar guitar that shocked one of the most ruthless negotiators in history. The Gibson's Holy Grail, that time forgot. Before we can understand why this moment mattered so much to Rick, we need to understand what the 1941 Gibson SJ200 actually represents.
The J200 is such a quality instrument. It really, really is.
Gibson began manufacturing the SJ200 in 1938. It was called the Jumbo model, and it was, without question, the highest-end guitar that Gibson had ever created. The SJ200 represented the pinnacle of guitar craftsmanship.
It was beautiful and rare-made.
And then came World War II. In 1941, the United States entered the war.
On Sunday, December 7, 1941, shortly before 8 a.m., Japan launched a surprise attack on the United States of America by bombing the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii.
And manufacturing priorities totally changed. Gibson, like most American companies, had to adjust its production to support the war effort. They stopped making the SJ200. The timeline was devastating for collectors. The SJ200 was only produced from 1938 until America's entry into the war halted production. That meant only a handful of these guitars were ever created. Only a few dozen, or maybe less. When expert Jesse Amoroso looked at the guitar that Landon brought into the pawn shop, his reaction was immediate and visceral.
It's the 1941 SJ200. It was their highest-end guitar. They introduced this model in 1938, went to war, and they stopped making them.
He held it in his hands like it was made of glass. In the world of vintage guitars, the 1941 Gibson SJ200 is what every collector dreams of finding. It's the one that got away. It's the ghost that haunts every estate sale and every dusty attic search. And now, one was sitting in the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas. The condition of the guitar reflected its age. There were cracks and repairs. It wasn't pristine, but that actually made it more authentic. But this guitar had something else attached to it, something that would elevate it from priceless to absolutely untouchable. The guitar belonged to Stephen Stills, the co-founder of Buffalo Springfield, co-founder of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, co-founder of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young.
In 1969, the supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young recorded Deja Vu. It's considered one of the greatest albums of the rock era.
One of the most influential musicians in the history of rock and roll. Stephen Stills was legendary in a way that transcended popularity. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, on the same day. He was inducted first for Buffalo Springfield, and then for Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young on the same day. That level of recognition is extraordinarily rare. It means he didn't just make good music, but also fundamentally changed the trajectory of music itself. And Stills was still alive. He was still touring, which meant that this guitar wasn't a historical artifact from a dead era. It was a tangible connection to a living legend, someone who could walk into the pawn shop and be interviewed. What made the guitar even more valuable was the documentation.
And you have like documentation. This was Stephen Stills.
I do have the bill of sale.
Bill of sale. This is to verify the sale of a Gibson J200 guitar, 1940.
Landon, the collector who brought it in, didn't just have the guitar. He had a signed bill of sale from Stephen Stills himself. He had the paper trail that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that this instrument had been owned and played by one of rock's greatest musicians. Rick Harrison understood the significance immediately. He wasn't just looking at a guitar, but a tangible piece of American music history. So now Rick Harrison was facing a dilemma. He had a 1941 Gibson SJ200 that had belonged to Stephen Stills, a man who'd fundamentally changed the sound of rock and roll. But what was it actually worth? And would Rick Harrison be willing to pay whatever price tag came attached to such a legendary instrument when a guitar becomes a fortune? Jesse Amoroso, the guitar expert, examined the instrument with the care of someone handling ancient artifacts. He ran his hands over the wood. He checked the joints, played a few notes, his face transforming as he felt the resonance of an 80-year-old Gibson resonating through his fingers. When he was done, his assessment was clear and definitive. As a vintage guitar alone, setting aside the Stephen Stills provenance entirely, this 1941 Gibson SJ200 was worth between $75,000 and $90,000.
The guitar on its own is probably worth anywhere between 75 and 90 grand just by itself.
That's an enormous amount of money for a single guitar. But then came the magic. The fact that Stephen Stills had owned it. That face alone added another $20,000 to $30,000 to its value. So the total valuation was somewhere between $95,000 and $120,000. For a guitar, an instrument that was made with just a piece of wood and metal and strings that could produce sound. Rick Harrison stared at those numbers. He wasn't dealing with the usual pawn shop dynamics anymore, or with someone who had come in with a desperation to sell a family heirloom because they had lost their job or faced medical bills. Landon was a serious guitar collector. He knew what he had, knew it was valuable, and wanted fair market value for it. Landon's asking price was $110,000. That was right in the middle of the expert appraisal. It was fair. And that's when something remarkable happened. Rick Harrison made a decision that revealed something deeper about who he was underneath all the business acumen. Rick didn't immediately agree to Landon's price. He couldn't. His entire identity was built on negotiation. But something was different about this negotiation. Rick brought in his team and asked Landon about the documentation again.
Just typed it up on an envelope. That's
It's very professional.
Criteria Recording Studios, bill of sale.
He asked about the bill of sale, the condition of the wood, the repairs, and the authenticity. He was doing what he always does, thorough due diligence. But there was something else happening underneath the surface. Rick was struggling. He was genuinely conflicted. One moment, he was the businessman calculating profit margins. The next moment, he was the kid who'd fallen in love with cars as a teenager. The man who understood that some things in the world have value that transcends money. He was the person who'd built an empire but had lost his family in the process. And now,
Pawn Stars creator Rick Harrison mourning the death of his son, Adam. The TV personality paid tribute to his late son on social media.
He was confronted with an object that represented everything his empire had been trying to claim. Connection to greatness. Connection to history. Connection to something meaningful. Rick and Landon began the dance of negotiation. Landon wanted $110,000. Rick made his opening offer lower, much lower. This is how pawn shop negotiations work. You start low, and haggle upward until you find a mutually acceptable price. But the numbers kept climbing. Rick couldn't bring himself to lowball this guitar. The negotiation moved to $90,000, then to $95,000. Then finally, Rick made his offer, $85,000. Rick offered $85,000, which Landon accepted immediately, and the seller later revealed that $85,000 was actually higher than his bottom line, so it wasn't only Harrison who hit the jackpot. Rick paid $85,000 for the Stephen Stills Gibson SJ200. He knew he could likely sell it for more, but that wasn't really why he bought it. He bought it because at that moment, when he was holding that guitar, when he understood its history and its significance, he forgot how to be a businessman. He remembered how to be human. But the guitar wasn't the only valuable thing in the history of Pawn Stars buys. What other valuables have found their way into Rick Harrison's shop? Rick Harrison's
pawn shop owners. I want to bring in Rick Harrison, who you may recognize from the TV series Pawn Stars. He's also the owner of the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas.
biggest cash buys. Pawn Stars is often associated with lowball offers, but every so often, an item enters the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop that flips the usual script. These are the moments when Rick Harrison stops thinking like a reseller and starts thinking like a historian, and when six-figure cash deals suddenly make sense. From precious metals to priceless machines and music legends, these purchases prove that sometimes the real value lies far beyond the price tag. One of the most quietly brilliant deals began with a piece of fatherly advice. Years earlier, a man had been urged by his dad to invest in something real. Taking that advice to heart, he poured his savings into more than 200 pounds of silver. Fast forward 12 years, and the silver market had exploded. When the seller walked into Rick's shop, he didn't come in to gamble. He was cashing in. Rick immediately recognized the opportunity. Silver prices had surged. Demand was strong, and with a clear profit margin in sight. This was a deal he could move fast on. But first came the verification. Rick ran the silver through a battery of tests, including drilling into the bars to confirm their purity, an act that always makes sellers wince but reassures buyers. Once satisfied, Rick didn't hesitate. He snapped up the hoard for a staggering $111,000. Then there was the car that practically redefined the word luxury. The 1932 Lincoln Roadster.
I have a 1932 Lincoln convertible V12.
Lincoln made some of the coolest cars ever made in the 1930s.
Was a rolling monument to pre-war American engineering. Built with comfort and prestige in mind, the Roadster featured a 150-horsepower V12 engine, making it more powerful than most cars of its era. This was not a vehicle for the average driver. It was designed for elites who wanted elegance and muscle in equal measure. When Rick and the old man inspected an exceptionally preserved example, they knew they were looking at something special. Cars like this don't come around often, and when they do, they demand serious money. Negotiations were brief and bold. Rick paid $95,000 in cash, a massive sum even by Pawn Stars standards. But the story didn't end there. In a move that perfectly captured the show's surreal charm, the seller promptly slid the cash right back across the counter and used it to buy $95,000 worth of gold.
Here we go. One more.
One more time.
I think gold is the best investment you can make today. A dollar doesn't buy much nowadays.
One legendary asset exchanged for another, all in a single transaction. There was another guitar that made history hum. A 1961 Gibson SG. Les Paul isn't rare on its own, but this one carried a legacy few instruments could rival. It belonged to Mary Ford, the wife and musical partner of Les Paul himself. Together, from 1950 to 1954, Mary and Les co-wrote 16 top 10 hits, sold millions of records, and reshaped popular music forever. Les Paul's solid-body guitar design would go on to define the sound of rock. This guitar wasn't just associated with that revolution. it was part of it. The seller knew its value and initially asked for an eye-watering 250,000 euros. Rick, ever the negotiator, pushed back hard. In the end, he secured the guitar for $90,000.
If you want to pay 90, you can have it.
All right, $90,000.
Deal.
All right, write it up.
Come on, man, we got a lot of paperwork to do.
Making it the largest guitar purchase of his career. Shockingly, these weren't the only incredible treasures Rick uncovered as a pawn master, and the way some were discovered made the story even more fascinating. Pawn Stars' most surprising big-money deals. One of the most unlikely six-figure adjacent deals began with a poker game. A man walked into the gold and silver pawn shop carrying what looked like a simple silver dollar. He explained that he had won it years earlier during a game of cards and believed it was worth around $20,000. Nice money, but nothing outrageous. The coin, however, was no ordinary silver dollar. It was a 1922 proof-piece high-relief dollar.
Got a 1922 proof high-relief matte finish coin.
Okay. Where did you get this?
I won it at a poker game.
A coin so rare that only an estimated 10 to 12 examples are believed to still exist. Rick immediately knew this required expert eyes. After a detailed examination, the valuation changed dramatically. The expert estimated the coin could be worth anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000, depending on condition and buyer demand. What had started as a modest poker prize was suddenly a museum-worthy artifact. Rick didn't hesitate. After some negotiation, the two struck a deal at $80,000, one of the biggest coin purchases in the show's history, and a perfect example of hidden value walking through the door. But that's far from all. Cars have always been a weakness for Rick, and few vehicles capture his attention like classic American roadsters. That passion was on full display when a pristine jet-black 1932 custom Ford Roadster rolled into the shop. This wasn't just a restored classic, it was a modern beast in vintage clothing. With a 500-horsepower engine and just 450 miles on the clock, the car blended old-school style with modern muscle. Rick and Corey immediately locked horns with the owner in a tense negotiation. The car's condition was nearly flawless, and its rarity only drove the price higher. The turning point came when Las Vegas custom car legend Danny the Count Coker laid eyes on it and clearly fell in love. Rick knew that if Danny wanted it, demand would be high. That realization pushed him to close the deal. In the end, Rick secured the Roadster for $68,250.
We do 67 for it. 68.50. 67.50.
68.50.
68,250.
All right, 68,250.
All right, we got a deal, man.
A risky buy, but one backed by expert enthusiasm and market appeal. Coins once again took center stage when Rick traveled to Atlanta for one of the largest coin auctions in the United States. This time, he wasn't shopping for himself. He was hunting for a specific item on behalf of a customer willing to pay top dollar. The target was a 1915 Panama Pacific octagonal $50 gold coin, one of the most unusual and desirable coins ever produced by the U.S. Mint. These coins were created to commemorate the opening of the Panama Canal, a monumental engineering achievement that reshaped global trade. Unlike traditional round coins, this one featured an octagonal design, making it instantly recognizable and highly collectible. Tracking one down wasn't easy. Rick located two potential options and entered negotiations, carefully balancing price against condition. Ultimately, he secured one for $67,500, comfortably under his customer's $70,000 budget, and a win that showcased Rick's skill beyond the pawn counter. As the show's reputation grew, so did the value of what crossed Rick's counter. But if a single coin could command nearly $70,000, what other jaw-dropping deals would soon follow? Pawn Stars' most jaw-dropping $50,000 deals. As Pawn Stars grew in popularity, so did the caliber of items passing through the doors of the gold and silver pawn shop. One of the most modern high-value purchases came wrapped in roaring horsepower and exclusivity. In 2013, car rental giant Hertz partnered with American motorsports icon Roger Penske to create something entirely unexpected. A limited run of just 150 Ford GT Mustangs built specifically for Hertz's performance fleet. These weren't ordinary rentals, they were collector-grade muscle cars designed to blur the line between showroom and racetrack. When a seller arrived with one of the first 10 ever produced, Rick knew this was no typical used car. Still, with this much money at stake, he wanted certainty. So he called in professional NASCAR driver Joey Logano to take the Mustang for a test drive. After Logano confirmed the car was in excellent condition and performed exactly as it should, Rick wasted no time. The two men shook hands on a $60,000 deal, securing Rick a rare modern collectible with instant resale appeal. Presidential history soon followed in a much quieter, but equally powerful form. A man walked into the shop carrying what he described as a once-in-a-lifetime artifact, a cigar box that once sat on President John F. Kennedy's desk in the Oval Office.
I have John F. Kennedy's cigar box he used in the White House.
This wasn't a reproduction or a rumor-based collectible. It was a verified piece of White House history, complete with several unsmoked cigars still inside. Rick understood the weight of the moment immediately. JFK memorabilia has long commanded extraordinary prices, and he knew that another of Kennedy's cigar boxes had sold for over $500,000 back in the 1990s. While this example wasn't expected to reach those heights, its provenance alone made it extraordinary. After careful negotiation, Rick managed to acquire the cigar box for $60,000, a deal that felt less like a purchase and more like preserving a moment frozen in American history. Music history closed out this trio of remarkable deals. The Fender Stratocaster is often considered the most iconic electric guitar ever made, shaping the sound of rock music for generations. So when legendary British studio guitarist Vic Flick walked into the shop carrying his 1961 Fender Stratocaster, Rick knew he was meeting a living piece of music history. Vic Flick was the man behind the instantly recognizable guitar riff of the original James Bond theme, a sound that has defined cinematic cool for over 6 decades. This very guitar had also been used on recordings for artists such as Tom Jones and even the Beatles, embedding it deeply into the fabric of popular music. There was no need for theatrics or drawn-out bargaining. Rick understood exactly what was in front of him, and so did Vic Flick. The two shook hands on a $55,000 deal.
I will go $55,000. I think that's a fair price. I take all the risks. All right.
Deal. Yeah. Okay.
Let's go do some paperwork.
Sealing the sale of a guitar, whose value came not just from its age or condition, but from the cultural legacy etched into every note it had ever played. Together, these purchases reveal just how wide the Pawn Stars universe can stretch, from modern muscle cars to presidential keepsakes and legendary guitars. But for every gold mine Rick uncovered, there were also costly fakes. Let's explore those. When even the experts get played. For every smashing success, there's a painful lesson in the ledger. Rick Harrison, Corey, and the old man all learned the hard way that even experience and instinct can't protect against every dud. From fake diamonds to fraudulent signatures, sometimes the history walking through the gold and silver doors comes with a hidden price tag. It all started in the 1970s when cubic zirconia first hit the market. Richard Harrison admitted to getting burned early on by the flashy synthetic stones. At the time, buyers barely knew these inexpensive imitations existed, let alone how to spot them. Rick estimates that he lost nearly $30,000 on mistaken purchases, a fortune at the time, but the experience taught the family a crucial lesson. Always verify before you buy. Even the next generation fell victim to youthful overconfidence. Corey Harrison recalled his early days working the night shift at 18 when he bought 6 fake Rolexes in a single week. Apparently, once word got out that he was an easy mark, sellers lined up to test him. The total cost? Around $4,000 on watches that were basically worthless. As Rick later explained, spotting a fake Rolex is simple if you know what to look for. But hindsight is always 20 by 20. Sometimes high-profile names weren't enough to protect investments. Take Vic Flick's 1961 Fender Stratocaster, purchased in the season 8 episode No Shoes, No Shirt, No Service. Flick, a legendary studio guitarist who played with Tom Jones and Paul McCartney and even contributed to James Bond soundtracks, sold Rick the guitar for $55,000. However, when it went to auction in 2014, it sold for just $25,000, proving that a musician's fame doesn't automatically translate into collectible value. However, when it went to auction in 2014, it sold for just $25,000, proving that a musician's fame doesn't automatically translate into collectible value. Classic cars also offered their share of misadventures. In Helmet Head, Rick purchased a 1964 Austin Healey Sprite BRG, drawn in by its sleek appearance.
So it's an Austin Healey what?
64 Sprite.
Austin Healeys are British sports cars that were produced from the 1950s to the 1970s.
The engine refused to start, and the seller dismissed the problem as a dead battery. Rick took him at his word. Big mistake. Thousands in repairs later, the car's charm didn't translate to a profitable resale, demonstrating that looks can be deceiving, even to a seasoned buyer. Even smaller items could sting. Rick once purchased a framed Grandpa Cyclops art print by Devo founder Mark Mothersbaugh for $625, expecting a tidy profit of $175 to $375. In reality, the seller had paid just $15 for it, a small yet satisfying reminder that not every loss is catastrophic. Sports memorabilia proved tricky as well. Rick shelled out $13,000 for a shoeless Joe Jackson signed book, only to discover the signature was likely fake. A season earlier, he'd bought a Wells Fargo Strongbox for $450, expecting to flip it. But expert appraisal revealed it to be a complete fantasy piece. Even authenticated items carried risk. Corey purchased a supposed game-worn Willie Mays uniform for $31,000, only to learn later that Mays had never owned it, rendering the investment nearly worthless. At the top of the list is what Rick calls Rick's Roulette, where multiple high-ticket items were sent to auction after failing to sell in the shop. Vic Flick's guitar was part of this, alongside a first edition of A Christmas Carol, a 1960s Spacelander bicycle, and even a motorcycle that alone lost roughly $29,000. The total losses from these auctions were substantial, proving that even a seasoned expert can't win every bet. Now that the show's contract with the History Channel has ended, does this mark the end of Pawn Stars and its ability to entertain audiences with fascinating finds? The limits of longevity in reality TV. After more than 2 decades on television, Pawn Stars appears to be at a crossroads. Once a ratings juggernaut for the History Channel, the series built its success on a simple but effective formula. Everyday people walking into the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop with unusual objects, followed by negotiations, expert appraisals, and lighthearted family banter. But now, with the show's contract officially expired and no confirmation of new episodes in the original format, the future of Pawn Stars is increasingly uncertain. One major factor is cast fatigue and shifting priorities. Corey Harrison has made it clear that he's ready to move on, having relocated and shifted his focus to other ventures, including podcasting. Rick Harrison, the face of the franchise, has also hinted that he may have reached the end of the road playing a heightened version of himself for television. After hundreds of episodes, even Rick has acknowledged that the routine can feel repetitive, both for the cast and the audience. Personal challenges have also changed the show's dynamic. The death of Richard the Old Man Harrison in 2018 marked a turning point.
Pawn shop Richard Harrison has died. Harrison, known on the show Pawn Stars as the Old Man, died.
His wisdom and dry humor were foundational to the show's identity, and his absence left a noticeable void. Add to that Chumley's past legal troubles, which temporarily complicated production and public perception, and it's clear the series has faced more turbulence behind the scenes than viewers often realize. Beyond the cast, broader industry changes are working against long-running cable hits. Television has shifted decisively towards streaming, shorter-form content, and digital-first programming. Rising production costs and declining cable viewership make it harder for networks like History to justify continuing older shows with aging formats. As one recent analysis pointed out, after hundreds of episodes, Pawn Stars began to feel predictable, with fewer genuinely surprising finds and increasingly familiar beats. That doesn't mean the brand is finished. Rick Harrison has teased the possibility of a Pawn Stars 2.0, suggesting a reimagined concept rather than a direct continuation. Meanwhile, spin-offs and adjacent projects, such as the Pawn After Dark podcast, show there's still interest in the personalities and world of the pawn shop. For now, Pawn Stars isn't officially over, but its classic format may be. Whether the franchise evolves or quietly fades, its legacy as one of reality TV's most enduring successes is already secure. Which deal in Pawn Stars history do you think Rick regrets the most? Would you sell a piece of the past for the right price, or protect it at any cost? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.